So today is the second Sunday in our Advent series, and our topic is peace. When you think about peace, when I think about peace, first things that come to mind are a lack of war, the absence of violence or conflict between individuals or groups, maybe about inner tranquility or quietness, stillness or harmony. It's a good start. In addition to this, peace as those in the times of the Bible considered it was also the idea of being whole or complete or right. And so this morning we will consider how Jesus brings us peace. When we think about what that means and how different it might feel to live in a state of peace compared to what we all experience, I think our hearts long to experience peace. I'm certain that all of us right now could come up with a list of relationships, of situations within yourself, of situations in the world that we just ache to see whole and complete and right. And the truth is, no matter how badly we want peace, as humans, we're terrible at it. Yeah. We are really, really bad at creating and sustaining peace. We can't do it. We struggle to remain at peace within ourselves. A state of stress-free security or calmness, of wholeness, is probably not the way we would describe our default mental state. I think most of us have something that causes us to be worried or unsettled regularly. And we know just by looking around at the world and what we hear that anxiety and depression are pervasive among us. We see evidence all around us that people are struggling to maintain their interpersonal relationships. We just have a hard time getting along with each other. Within our communities, it seems like we're having a more and more difficult time with that as things go on. Violence and civil unrest are increasing. At least in my lifetime, it seems to be worse than I remember it ever being. And I did a little research, and it turns out there are 56 armed conflicts going on in the world that involve 92 countries. That's a lot, way more than I would have thought. Some of them, of the three largest, with the most casualties usually annually, some of them have been going on since, two of them have been going on since 1948. That's a lot of destruction. The world needs peace. And in this season in which we declare that Jesus came to bring peace on earth, we're going to look at our passage and consider what we can learn about peace from the prophecy that God gave to Isaiah. And so as we consider God's word this morning, there are several ways we're going to look at what the Lord is doing. Pastor Mark spoke about looking back and looking forward. We're going to remember what he has promised and what he has already done. We'll look in hope for what he plans and has promised us to do in the future to set all things right, to heal the brokenness, and establish peace and justice in the world. And we'll look around us also at a world that is still desperately broken and ponder how he is working through our lives to extend the hope, peace, joy, and love of God's kingdom now. So, in our passage today, we see that peace comes through a person, the Prince of Peace. He brings peace that we should all long for as we wait for him to come and restore the world to the way things ought to be. Looking at our text, Isaiah was sent to deliver a message to God's people during a time of constant struggle and conflict, where peace of any kind was in short supply, much like today. The beginning chapters of Isaiah can best be described as a list of indictments of all of the people in the ancient Near East. Through Isaiah, God enumerates the sins of the nations and the coming judgment, saving his judgment for Israel and Judah for the last. Due to their persistent disobedience and rejection of him, God condemns Israel to destruction, and he tells them that Assyria is coming for you. With Judah, they've been intermittently faithful, and God doesn't exclude them from punishment, but says that he still trusts that they are going to turn to him. And so while Assyria is going to come and they are going to face some dark and challenging and painful times, he will still deliver them. and that they should look to him instead of within themselves to their own strength and their own might for salvation. So this is important to understand as we look at today's passage, which is the message of deliverance. So I'll just read it again. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in a land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you, as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. So we'll stop there for the moment. The deliverance God promises is one that he says will be great and overwhelming joy. He uses a picture of light in the dark, and which is one that we understand well because all of us at some point have been stuck in the dark and found it unsettling and have felt the relief that comes when there's a light and we can see again. And we know that everything's okay. Isaiah compares the relief that God is bringing to this, the light that comes in the darkness. At the time that this prophecy was given, Isaiah's audience probably didn't feel things were terribly dark. They were pretty used to the upheaval they were living in. And while life was difficult, they hadn't really reached a point of crisis. They were basically experiencing a normal level of bad. Just before this passage, though, Isaiah had told them that the crisis is coming and it's going to be awful. And yet, it hadn't come yet. And these words that he gives, the words message of deliverance, were for these people to hold on to once that crisis came. The message was intended to let God's people know that while things will become bad for them, he has a plan, and he is in control, and he will provide them relief. It is intended to bring peace to the hearts of those who heard and believed the message, that in the face of, fear and horror of being surrounded by the Assyrian army, God will be faithful to those who trust him and turn to him. He promises deliverance, like in the Battle of Midian. And Chris did a nice job of explaining what that was last week. It's in Judges 6 and 7. Suffice to say, the Lord arranged a battle against the oppressors of Israel in which the only work that he left available to the people was to trust him and follow his instructions, while he delivered their enemies and they didn't lift so much as a sword to fight. This reference is a message of comfort, as Isaiah uses a past instance of God's amazing faithfulness and provision and salvation to remind them that he has acted with power, and he does act with power to save and to redeem his people. I know one thing that's amazed me is I've read the Old Testament for the first time when I was young and looked at how many times God's people were in peril, they expected a battle, they expected a fight, they expected to be destroyed. And God defeats their enemies without their lifting a finger. It's not a one-off or even a two-off situation. It happened over and over and over again. And it happens again in Isaiah 37 to the people who are hearing this message when God delivers them from the Assyrian army that has surrounded them and was poised to destroy them in the morning, and suddenly they were gone. God is planning to deliver these people that Isaiah is speaking to in an unaccountable way. And while the promise of deliverance from poor rulers and international enemies was a great relief to these people, I'm sure, and the deliverance even more so, we know that this was not all God had planned as he gave Isaiah this prophecy. The people of Judah had larger problems than corrupt leaders and constant warfare. Isaiah makes clear to them earlier in the passage that the root of their problem was their broken relationship with God, their creator. As Isaiah describes how he will bring the people relief from darkness and oppression, we see a picture of something greater than political deliverance to come. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing it and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Isaiah writes that the relief the people receive, the defeat of their enemies, will come through a person who will be born. In the Jewish tradition, they consider this prophecy to be about the king Hezekiah, who ruled over the kingdom of Judah when the Assyrians came and attacked, who he was a good king, who did lead people back to their faith in God at the time of the siege of the Assyrians. However, many of the prophecies in Isaiah have multiple levels of meaning. They were fulfilled on one level during the relatively immediate present, as well as pointing hearers to the greater work that God was doing and had planned for the future. In this case, there are several things about the text that tell us that this prophecy was only partly about Hezekiah and mostly about someone else. The words used to describe the king who will bring ultimate deliverance to God's people indicate his divinity. Words such as mighty God and eternal Father tell us that it is God himself who will do this work in a way that a mere human king cannot. Amen. The government established by this king will bring no end to peace. It will be known by its justice and its righteousness forever. And we are used to reading this passage and automatically associating it with Jesus, especially those of us who've been coming to church most of our lives. We know that he is the descendant of David that appears in numerous prophecies, who's meant to rule God's world forever. When I was preparing, I took some time, though, and to pause and consider these titles applied to Jesus that are probably as familiar to you as they are to me. I've heard them every Christmas since I was a child. And maybe like me, they've become familiar to you to a point of, oh yeah, okay. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Yeah, yep, that's him. But there's a lot in there. And as I prepared, it helped me to think about and thought about each of these titles that Isaiah gives Jesus. It helped me to think about how when we approach Jesus, maybe we've created a picture of him in his mind and we've forgotten all of the different facets of him. And Isaiah helps us to see him here from different angles. Jesus is our wonderful counselor. A counselor is someone who gives us direction and guidance. When we turn to a counselor or an advisor, it is to help us see what we don't see, to find wisdom that maybe we don't have, and to guide us on our path. Jesus is the ultimate counselor. He knows us, he knows our names, he knows our lives. And he is the ultimate guide because he made us and everything that is. So he knows how everything ought to be, how everything works correctly. While our own ideas and instincts about how we live our life often lead us towards sin, even when we're trying to do well, we need his example and his leadership, his guidance to show us the way to go. This is especially true. You can see this especially true in our relationships, where we regularly hurt others and cause conflict and disturb the peace without meaning to. And we need the guidance of the Lord through his word and through prayer to help us make our way out of the mess we made. When I remember to turn to Jesus as a guide and a counselor, I am comforted to know that even when following his guidance, and it doesn't feel like what I want to do or what I should do, or how's this going to help? I know that he does know, and that he is leading me down a path because he created all of this and everything, and he knows how to make things go well. Jesus is mighty God. I think it's really easy to pay lip service to his power, but without remembering or possibly maybe not fully believing that he actually has it. I think it has to do with, as I thought about it, with the fact that his power and creativity are so far beyond us that it's difficult for us to wrap our minds around it. There's nothing, because we can't understand it, it's harder to hold on to. Jesus is God. He is so powerful that he made everything with his words, as was said earlier, and he can destroy it just as easily if he chose. If he has this power, he has the power to end wars, to protect us from oppressive leaders, to show us the way to reconcile with other groups, with our friends and our family. He has the power to change our hearts and the hearts of others, to help us love and forgive those who we can't love and forgive on our own. Many times when I'm praying about my challenges and struggles, when I'm praying about conflict in my family, trouble at work, my concerns about what's going on in the world, I don't think I pray with the mindset that I'm seeking help from someone who really can do anything. But our mighty God can do anything. And he wants to see things set right. We need his power to help us as we seek peace in our lives and in our world. Just think how hard it is to do things like resist temptation to lash out at someone when they've hurt us or to forgive them. Even doing these small single actions is something we can't do on our own power very often. The work that Jesus does requires great power to conquer sin, to defeat evil, and put this broken world right is a feat so great that he is the only one who can do it. Jesus is everlasting Father. Had to take a minute. It's a little weird to think about prophesying about a child who will come and he will be called Father. But Jesus fills the role of Father. He has existed since the beginning, and as John, his disciple, said, all things were made through him, and nothing was made that has been made without him. Jesus provides for us. He cares for our needs, great and small, and protects us. He is not merely a distant Lord, a benevolent force out there, but someone who knows us and loves us and wants to be known and loved by us. He sacrificed himself for us so that we might live forever with him. Our fathers exist to provide for us, to care for us, to lead us, and we see that Jesus does the same for us and for all of his creation. And Jesus is the Prince of Peace. Through his sacrifice, he has covered the offense of our sin and allowed us to have peace with God. He showed us how to live a life of peace through the example of his own life, both showing and telling us how to live in harmony with God and others. By offering us redemption from the power of sin in our lives, with his help, we are able to follow him. We are able to obey him and make peace with each other. And finally, one day he will come and he will make the world right and establish everlasting peace. Harmony and justice will reign as he is restored as king over all of his creation. So we see in this text how even though God was planning to bring punishment upon his people for their unfaithfulness, he loves and cares for them, providing words of comfort and showing that he still desires to save them, not only from their immediate needs and peril, but also to save them from their alienation from him. We see a picture of Jesus in the description of the child who will be born, the king who is coming, at whose birth we are preparing our hearts and minds to celebrate. We remember that the birth of Jesus, who was both God and human, because only God could save us, allowed him to break the power of sin over our lives through his death and resurrection. Finally, we see that Jesus will reign over a kingdom that is characterized by justice and righteousness, that the peace and justice he brings will cause rejoicing like no other, and that there will be no end to this reign. This is a peace that can't be messed up or wrecked or destroyed. This is what all creation has longed for since God's creation was broken by the effect of sin. And so one of the ways this passage informs our observance of Advent is to remind us that this promised king has come. He was born. That is what we're looking forward to celebrating. Not only that, but he has already begun to establish his kingdom, just as he promised. When Jesus started his ministry in the Gospel of Matthew, it tells us that he proclaims that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. When I say my message notes or my bottle of water is at hand, I'm not saying they're home 3 blocks away. They're right here with me where I can access them and touch them and use them. In the same way, the kingdom of heaven is here now. It means it's close enough for us to reach. And the kingdom, while it hasn't found full expression in the world, as we're waiting for, is already established. And by placing our lives under the authority of King Jesus, we need to remember that we are already citizens of the kingdom that he promised to establish. We still live in this world. We are still affected by our sin and the sin of others and the brokenness of this world. And while we still, because of that, often try to deal with our anxious hearts, with our interpersonal conflicts and the social problems around us, the same way everybody else does, because it's just the culture, it's what we've learned, we have the option to turn to Jesus and to have him help us bring true peace as we follow his ways that lead to peace. Jesus says in Matthew 11:28 that we can come to him and he will take our burdens and he will give us rest. While that doesn't mean he will immediately take away or resolve all our problems, he will support us, he will uphold us and preserve us as he works with us and carries us through this world. He will change our hearts. And the first heart he might change as he helps us with what we're struggling with is probably most likely going to be our own. Jesus wants to bring peace to our lives. He also wants to use us to spread his peace throughout this world, both by sharing the good news of what he is and by following his example that he set in his own life for how to live in peace. Sometimes that looks like being willing to meet someone with forgiveness and patience in my heart when I've been wronged, and I would rather hold on to that grudge. It may look like walking away from a fight that I really want to jump into with all my heart. It may look like finding ways to build understanding and reconciliation between various groups within our community. Just like God helped the people of Israel in ways that they didn't expect, fighting battles for them that they thought that they would have to fight themselves. He does the same for us in various different ways. I know that there have been many times when I've turned to the Lord seeking help to heal conflict, to heal my anxiety. And just like he did so many times for the people of Israel and Judah, he made a way to resolve my situation that I didn't see possible. And that usually started by changing my heart, by stepping out and obeying him. But he still worked in the world. He changed other people's hearts. He affected situations in ways that I could not see or tell or do on my own. Jesus is our Prince of Peace. Through him, we have peace with God as we share our burdens with him. He comforts us and brings us peace within ourselves. And as we follow his example and trust in his power to work in mighty ways, we can spread his peace in our relationships and in the world we live in. And the peace of Christ be with you all. Thank you.